The Millionaire's Lost Love, a journey of family, forgiveness, and second chances. For Joseph Foster, life had been a series of successes. As a millionaire hotel tycoon, he was accustomed to power, prestige, and control. Yet, no amount of wealth could fill the void left by Jennifer Adams, the love of his youth. 25 years ago, a tragic accident had torn her from his life, leaving him with nothing but memories of her laughter and the scent of her favorite perfume. But fate had other plans. One ordinary day, as Joseph walked through the halls of one of his luxurious hotels, a familiar scent stopped him in his tracks. Turning a corner, he caught a glimpse of a housekeeper whose silhouette mirrored Jennifer's. Could it be her? The possibility left him reeling, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Overwhelmed with emotion, Joseph approached the woman, only for her to turn and flee. Why would she run? Could it really be Jennifer, alive after all these years? And if it was, what secrets could she be hiding? This is a story of lost love, hidden truths, and the journey to heal a family fractured by time. Follow Joseph as he unravels the mystery of Jennifer's disappearance and discovers the shocking truth that will change his life forever. The grand lobby of the Foster Hotel glimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Polished marble floors reflected the bustle of guests, their hurried steps a quiet symphony in the background. Joseph Foster, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, strolled through the space with the commanding presence of a man who had everything. His salt and pepper hair added to his distinguished air, and his piercing gray eyes scanned the room, though his thoughts were elsewhere. At 50, Joseph had built an empire of luxury hotels, each more opulent than the last. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, there was a void, one he rarely allowed himself to dwell on. It was Jennifer, his first and only true love, lost to a tragic bus accident 25 years ago. The memory of her haunted him, the warmth of her laughter, the way her favorite perfume lingered in the air long after she had gone. Time hadn't dulled the ache of her absence. As he passed a corner of the lobby, something stopped him in his tracks. That scent, it was unmistakable. A delicate, floral fragrance that sent his mind spiraling back decades. His heart raced as he turned his head, searching for the source. There she was. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform pushed a cart of cleaning supplies toward the elevators. Her back was turned, but her slender frame, the tilt of her head, it was all too familiar. Joseph's chest tightened as he struggled to breathe. Could it really be her? Jennifer, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman paused, her hands gripping the cart. Slowly, she turned her head, and their eyes met. Joseph's world stopped. Her face had aged, her features now lined with the passage of time, but it was undeniably Jennifer. Her wide hazel eyes mirrored the same shock and recognition he felt. Jennifer, he said again, louder this time, taking a step toward her. Jennifer's face paled, her expression shifting from surprise to fear. Without a word, she spun on her heel and darted toward the staff corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Joseph stood frozen for a moment before the realization hit him, she was running. Wait, he called out, his voice breaking the stillness, but she was already gone. Joseph returned to his penthouse suite, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He paced the luxurious room, his leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. His heart warred between elation and confusion. How could she be alive? Why would she run from him? He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the crystal tumbler. Taking a deep breath, he replayed the brief encounter in his mind, searching for answers in her reaction. Was she scared? Ashamed? Did she even want to be found? Determined not to let her slip away again, Joseph called his assistant, Clara. I need the employee roster for this hotel, he said, his tone brisk. Clara hesitated. Of course, Mr. Foster, but may I ask why? Joseph's voice softened slightly. I think I've found someone I've been looking for a very long time. The next day, Joseph sat in his office reviewing the roster. There it was, Jennifer Adams, housekeeping staff. Her address, her work schedule, it was all there. A mix of relief and guilt washed over him. Relief that she was alive, and guilt that she was working such a menial job while he thrived. He decided to approach her after her shift. This wasn't a conversation for a grand hotel lobby or an impersonal office. He needed privacy, space for her to feel safe. His emotions wrestled with his logic as he waited for the hours to pass. When the evening arrived, Joseph positioned himself discreetly near the staff exit. He spotted Jennifer stepping out, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. She clutched her bag tightly, her steps hurried as though she wanted to escape unseen. "Jennifer," he called softly, stepping into the light. She froze mid-step, her back still turned to him. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a mixture of weariness and apprehension. "Joseph," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his tone filled with an urgency that betrayed his usual calm demeanor. "I need to understand. How are you alive?" Jennifer's shoulders sagged, and she looked away, her hands trembling. "It's complicated," she whispered. "Then explain it to me," Joseph pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, Jennifer. For 25 years, I thought you were gone. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Her hazel eyes met his, glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said quietly. "But I couldn't come back." "Why not?" Joseph's voice softened, but his desperation remained. "I need to know the truth." Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. "Fine," she said. "But not here. Let's go somewhere private." They found a small cafe nearby, its dim lighting and quiet atmosphere providing the privacy they needed. As they sat across from each other, Joseph studied her face, memorizing every detail he thought he'd lost forever. Jennifer sighed, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I was in that accident," she began. "I woke up in a hospital with no memory of who I was or where I came from. By the time my memory returned, years had passed, and I thought you had moved on." Joseph's jaw tightened, his fists clenching on the table. "How could you think that? You were everything to me, Jennifer. Everything." Her voice broke as she continued. "I didn't know how to find you. And, there's more." "What more could there be?" Joseph asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jennifer hesitated, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Joseph, I was pregnant when the accident happened. I have a son." "Your son?" Joseph's breath caught, the weight of her words crashing over him. "A son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You mean? I have a son?" Jennifer nodded, her face etched with guilt and fear. "His name is Blake. He's 25 now. But he doesn't know about you." Joseph leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. The woman he had loved, the son he never knew he had, both lost and found in the span of a single day. His heart ached with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "I need to meet him," Joseph said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "Jennifer, I need to know my son." Jennifer wiped her tears, her gaze unwavering. "I'll arrange it," she said. "But Joseph, he might not accept you." Joseph nodded, his resolve unshaken. "I'll take that chance. I've already lost 25 years, I won't lose any more." And so, the path to healing began, fraught with uncertainty but fueled by hope. Little did they know, the hardest part was yet to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the city as Jennifer stepped nervously into the cafe where she had agreed to meet Joseph. Her hands trembled as she clutched her worn handbag, her heart pounding with every step. She spotted him immediately, sitting at a corner table, his suit immaculate as always, but his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, were filled with vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Jennifer," he said softly, standing as she approached. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, unable to find her voice. As they sat across from each other, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Joseph, usually so composed, struggled to contain the storm of emotions within him. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer sighed, her gaze fixed on the table. "I suppose I should start," she said. "You deserve to know the truth." She began hesitantly, her voice shaking as she recounted the events of the bus accident. "I was on my way to see you," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I wanted to tell you something important, but the bus, it crashed. I woke up in a hospital, disoriented, with no memory of who I was or why I was there. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived." Joseph's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I searched for you," he said, his voice cracking. "I went to every hospital, every morgue. When I couldn't find you, I thought you were gone." Jennifer reached for a napkin, dabbing her eyes. "I didn't remember anything for months," she continued. "And when my memories finally came back, it had been years. I thought you'd moved on. You were already successful, and I didn't want to disrupt your life." Joseph shook his head, his voice laced with anguish. "How could you think that? You were my life, Jennifer." Jennifer hesitated, the weight of her next words pressing down on her. "There's more, Joseph," she said quietly. "I wasn't just coming to see you that day. I was coming to tell you that I was pregnant." Joseph froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Pregnant?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. She nodded, her hands trembling. "I had a son, Joseph. His name is Blake. He's 25 now." The words hit Joseph like a tidal wave, leaving him reeling. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't think. The idea that he had a son he had never known, was almost too much to process. "A son," he repeated, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jennifer's voice broke as she tried to explain. "I didn't know how to find you. And when I did remember, I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't want us, that it was too late. Blake grew up thinking his father didn't want him, and I couldn't bear to hurt him with the truth." Joseph's hands clenched into fists, his mind racing with regret and frustration. "Do you have any idea what you've taken from me?" he asked, his voice rising. "I missed his first steps, his first words, his entire childhood. You had no right to decide that for me." Jennifer flinched, her tears falling freely now. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I was wrong. But I thought I was protecting him." Joseph leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. His heart ached with the weight of all the moments he had lost, but beneath the pain was a flicker of hope. "I need to meet him," he said firmly. "Jennifer, please. I need to know my son." Jennifer hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'll arrange it," she said finally. "But you need to be patient, Joseph. Blake has only ever known me. This won't be easy for him." Joseph nodded, his determination unwavering. "I'll wait as long as it takes," he said. "But I can't lose him too." The next day, Jennifer sat with Blake at their small apartment, her hands clasped tightly as she tried to find the right words. Blake, with his dark hair and sharp hazel eyes, bore a striking resemblance to Joseph. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's heart. "Blake," she began cautiously, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up, his brow furrowed. "What's going on, Mom? You're acting weird." Jennifer took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "It's about your father." Blake's expression darkened instantly. "I don't have a father," he said flatly. "You've told me that my whole life. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "That's not true," she said softly. "Your father, he's alive. And he wants to meet you." Blake stared at her, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "You're joking, right? After 25 years, now he suddenly wants to meet me? Where has he been all this time?" Jennifer reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Blake, please. It's not what you think. He didn't know about you. It's my fault. I didn't tell him." Blake stood abruptly, his fists clenched. "So you've been lying to me my whole life? What else aren't you telling me, Mom?" "Blake, please," Jennifer begged, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was protecting you. Just give him a chance." Blake shook his head, his voice filled with anger. "I don't need him," he said coldly. "I don't need either of you." He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him, leaving Jennifer sobbing on the couch. When Jennifer called Joseph later that evening, her voice was thick with emotion. "It didn't go well," she admitted. "Blake's angry and confused. He feels betrayed." Joseph's heart sank, but he refused to give up. "I'll wait," he said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn his trust." Jennifer hesitated before replying. "Then you'll need patience, Joseph. He's not ready yet." Joseph nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I've waited 25 years, Jennifer. I can wait a little longer." And so, the first steps toward reconciliation were taken, though the road ahead would be anything but easy. The next few days were a blur for Joseph. His mind was consumed by thoughts of Blake, his son. The son he had never known, never held, never even imagined until now. Each passing hour deepened his sense of loss, but also his resolve. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for a future where they were a family. At Jennifer's apartment, the atmosphere was tense. Blake had barely spoken to her since the revelation, his anger simmering beneath the surface. She watched him pace their modest living room, his steps heavy with frustration. "Blake," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I know this is hard, but please, can we talk about it?" Blake stopped, turning to face her. His hazel eyes, so much like Joseph's, were clouded with hurt. "Talk about what, Mom? The fact that you lied to me my whole life? Or the fact that some rich stranger thinks he can just walk in and be my dad?" Jennifer flinched at his words. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I did it because I thought it was what was best for you. I was scared, Blake. Scared of how you'd feel, scared of how he'd react. I didn't know what else to do." Blake crossed his arms, his voice bitter. "Well, congratulations. You managed to screw it up anyway." Meanwhile, Joseph waited anxiously in his office, his phone resting on the desk in front of him like a lifeline. When Jennifer finally called, her tone was heavy with exhaustion. "He's still angry," she said. "He feels betrayed, Joseph. And honestly, I can't blame him." Joseph's heart sank, but he nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand," he said quietly. "But I'm not giving up. Tell me what I can do." Jennifer hesitated, then spoke carefully. "He needs time. And when he's ready, he needs to see that you're not just here to make yourself feel better. He needs to know you're serious." "I'll wait," Joseph said firmly. "And when the time comes, I'll prove it to him." A week later, Blake returned home late one evening, his expression guarded. Jennifer had been waiting for him, her heart aching to mend the growing distance between them. "Blake," she began, her voice hesitant. "Joseph asked me to give you this." She held out an envelope, her hands shaking slightly. "It's a letter." He wanted to explain himself. Blake stared at the envelope for a long moment before snatching it from her hands. "Fine," he muttered, retreating to his room and slamming the door. Jennifer sat down, her chest tight with worry. All she could do now was hope that Joseph's words would reach him. In his room, Blake opened the letter, his fingers trembling slightly. Joseph's handwriting was neat and deliberate, each word carefully chosen. I know this isn't the way you wanted to find out about me, and I don't blame you for being angry. If I had known about you, I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for you. But I didn't know, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of your future, if you'll let me. Not as a replacement for the life you've known, but as someone who wants to know you. I want to hear about your dreams, your struggles, and the person you've become. Because, Blake, I already know one thing, you are my son, and that means the world to me. I won't push you, but I'll be here when you're ready. Take all the time you need. With love. Joseph. Blake folded the letter and placed it on his desk. He didn't cry, but his chest felt tight, his emotions a confusing swirl of anger, sadness, and curiosity. The next day, Blake approached Jennifer hesitantly. I'll meet him, he said, his voice low. But I'm not promising anything. Jennifer nodded, relief washing over her. That's all he's asking for, Blake. Just a chance. The first meeting between father and son was tentative and awkward. They met at a small cafe, Jennifer sitting nearby for moral support. Joseph stood as Blake entered, his heart pounding in his chest. Blake, he said softly, extending a hand. Blake hesitated before shaking it, his grip firm but guarded. Joseph, he replied, the word feeling strange on his tongue. They sat down, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. Finally, Joseph spoke. I want you to know I'm not here to force anything, he said. I just want to get to know you. Blake nodded, his expression unreadable. Okay. They started slowly, talking about Blake's favorite sports, his college classes, and his aspirations. Joseph listened intently, his eyes lighting up with every detail. Blake, despite his reservations, couldn't help but feel a flicker of connection. After the meeting, Blake admitted to Jennifer, he's not what I expected. Jennifer smiled, her voice filled with hope. Give it time, Blake. He's trying. Blake nodded, his walls beginning to crack. For the first time, he felt the faint stirrings of curiosity about the man who called himself his father. The journey was far from over, but it had begun, and that was enough, for now. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of a small cafe where Joseph and Blake had agreed to meet again. It had been a week since their first encounter, and though the initial tension hadn't fully disappeared, there was an air of cautious curiosity between them. Joseph arrived early, his nerves evident in the way he adjusted his watch and straightened his blazer. He had rehearsed countless conversations in his mind, but nothing could prepare him for the real thing. Blake walked in a few minutes later, his movements confident but his expression guarded. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, his casual attire a stark contrast to Joseph's tailored suit. Yet, despite their differences, there was a hint of anticipation in his hazel eyes. Hey, Blake greeted as he sat down. Hey, Joseph replied, offering a small smile. Thanks for coming. Blake shrugged. Figured I'd give it another shot. Over coffee, their conversation started slowly, revolving around neutral topics like sports and favorite movies. Joseph asked about Blake's hobbies, his studies, and his ambitions. For the first time, Joseph heard his son talk about his love for graphic design and his dream of working in animation. Graphic design? Joseph asked, his interest genuine. That's incredible. I'd love to see some of your work. Blake raised an eyebrow. You actually care about that? Joseph leaned forward, his tone sincere. Of course, I do. I want to know what matters to you, Blake. Blake hesitated, but something in Joseph's voice softened his defenses. Maybe I'll show you someday, he muttered, a small crack of warmth in his otherwise stoic demeanor. As weeks turned into months, their meetings became more frequent. Joseph didn't push, he let Blake set the pace, understanding the fragility of their relationship. Slowly but surely, Blake began to open up. They started doing simple activities together, grabbing coffee, going for walks, and even shooting hoops at a nearby park. One sunny afternoon, Blake surprised Joseph by bringing a basketball to one of their meetings. "Think you can keep up, old man?" he teased, a mischievous grin breaking through his usual seriousness. Joseph laughed, the sound genuine and unrestrained. "You might be surprised, kid." The game was light-hearted and filled with laughter, a moment of pure connection that neither of them had expected. As they sat on the bench afterward, catching their breath, Blake turned to Joseph. "You're not as bad as I thought," he admitted, a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. Joseph smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "And you're better than I ever imagined." Through these small moments, a bond began to form. Blake started calling Joseph Dad, hesitantly at first but with growing confidence. Each time the word left his lips, Joseph felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. Jennifer, who often watched their interactions from a distance, felt her heart swell with pride and relief. The two most important men in her life were finally finding their way to each other. Jennifer herself became a bridge between them, sharing stories from Blake's childhood that made Joseph laugh and tear up in equal measure. "He used to draw on everything," she said one evening, smiling fondly. "Walls, furniture, even my old shoes. I think I still have one of those somewhere." Blake rolled his eyes, embarrassed. "Mom, seriously?" Joseph chuckled, his gaze softening as he looked at Blake. "I'd love to see those drawings someday." Despite their progress, the journey wasn't without setbacks. Blake still struggled with moments of anger and doubt, lashing out when old wounds reopened. "You missed everything, Dad," he said one evening, his voice tinged with frustration. "My childhood, my struggles, you weren't there." Joseph's heart ached at the accusation, but he didn't defend himself. Instead, he nodded, his voice steady. "You're right, Blake. I wasn't there, and I can never make up for that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Blake's shoulders slumped, his anger melting into a quiet sadness. I don't know how to trust this," he admitted. Joseph reached out, placing a hand on Blake's shoulder. "It's okay to feel that way," he said gently. "I'll keep showing up until you do." Jennifer continued to be a source of support for both of them, reminding them of the importance of patience and understanding. "Healing takes time," she told Joseph one evening. "But you're doing the right thing. He sees it, even if he doesn't say it yet." Blake, too, confided in Jennifer, sharing his fears and frustrations. "I want to believe him, Mom," he said. "But what if this doesn't last?" Jennifer held his hand, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "He's not perfect, Blake, but he's trying. And that's more than we can say for a lot of people." One day, as the three of them sat together at the park, Blake turned to Joseph, his expression serious. "Why do you even care so much?" he asked. "You've got everything, money, success, your fancy life. Why do I matter?" Joseph's eyes softened, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Because you're my son," he said simply. "You matter more than all of that combined. I didn't even know what I was missing until I found you." Blake looked away, his jaw tightening, but a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Okay," he said quietly. "I think I'm starting to believe you." Jennifer smiled, her heart swelling with hope. For the first time in years, it felt like their fractured family was beginning to heal. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were on it together, and that made all the difference. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the city as Blake stepped out of his apartment. In his hand, he held a small gift box, a gesture he had thought long and hard about. Today marked the first time he would truly acknowledge Joseph as his father. He wasn't sure what to expect, but for once, he felt ready. When Blake arrived at Joseph's penthouse, the door opened to reveal a man who seemed as nervous as he was. Joseph, dressed casually for the first time Blake could remember, smiled warmly. "You made it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "Yeah," Blake replied, stepping inside. "I thought we could hang out or something." Joseph laughed softly, his voice lighter than Blake had ever heard. "I'd like that." They spent the day together, sharing stories and laughter as if years hadn't been lost between them. Joseph took Blake to his office, showing him the intricate designs of the hotels he had built. Blake listened intently, his admiration for his father growing with each detail. But it wasn't just Joseph who shared. Blake brought out his tablet, showing Joseph his graphic design projects. One was a logo for a fictional animation studio, and another, to Joseph's surprise, was a reimagining of one of the Foster Hotel logos. "This is incredible," Joseph said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "You have real talent, Blake." Blake shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Thanks. It's just something I love doing." Joseph placed a hand on Blake's shoulder. "If it's something you love, it's more than just. Don't ever downplay that." Later, they were joined by Jennifer at a quiet restaurant near the city park. The three of them shared a meal, the atmosphere warm and relaxed. Jennifer couldn't help but smile as she watched father and son interact with a natural ease that had taken months to build. For the first time in years, she felt whole, a sense of family she had feared would never return. After dinner, they walked through the park, the cool evening air filled with the sounds of laughter and distant music. Blake, emboldened by the day's events, turned to Joseph. "So, what now?" he asked hesitantly. "Where do we go from here?" Joseph stopped walking, his face serious but kind. "We go forward," he said. "Together. As a family." Blake glanced at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Blake smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Okay," he said quietly. "Together." As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened. Blake began spending more time with Joseph, joining him on trips to the hotels and even assisting with some marketing campaigns. His designs caught the attention of Joseph's team, who praised his creativity and unique perspective. One afternoon, as they worked together in Joseph's office, Blake looked up from his laptop. "You know," he said casually, "I think I might actually like calling you Dad." Joseph's heart swelled, his voice catching as he replied. "I'd like that, too." Jennifer, meanwhile, found herself reconnecting with Joseph in a way she hadn't thought possible. Their shared moments were filled with quiet conversations, laughter, and a sense of ease that came from years of history. Joseph, now more humble and grounded, began to show Jennifer the side of himself she had fallen in love with so many years ago. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Joseph's penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, he turned to her. "I've been thinking," he began. "About us. About what we had, and what we could have again." Jennifer smiled, her eyes filled with both warmth and caution. "We've been through so much, Joseph. But I think we're finding our way back." Joseph took her hand gently. "I never stopped loving you, Jennifer. And if there's any chance we could build something again, I'm willing to try." Tears filled Jennifer's eyes as she nodded. "Then let's try." The next few months were a whirlwind of growth and healing for all three of them. Blake thrived in his work, even landing his first freelance project with a major design firm. Joseph and Jennifer spent more time together, rediscovering the connection they thought had been lost forever. And as a family, they began creating new traditions, weekend dinners, movie nights, and quiet walks through the park. The journey hadn't been easy, and the scars of the past still lingered. But through patience, love, and forgiveness, they found a way to move forward. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Blake glanced between Joseph and Jennifer. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "we're not perfect. But we're pretty close to being a real family, huh?" Jennifer laughed softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I think we're better than perfect," she said. "We're real." Joseph nodded, his heart full. "And I wouldn't trade this for anything." The three of them sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of their newfound connection wrapping around them like a blanket. Together, they faced the future with hope, knowing that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them as a family. Joseph, Jennifer, and Blake's story reminds us that life often takes us on unexpected journeys, but it is never too late to reconnect, heal, and rediscover the bonds that truly matter. Through their struggles, they learned the transformative power of love and forgiveness, proving that even the deepest wounds can mend when we open our hearts. This is more than a tale of reconciliation, it's a testament to the resilience of family, the courage to face painful truths, and the beauty of second chances. Joseph's determination to make up for lost time, Jennifer's unwavering love, and Blake's eventual acceptance show us that healing is possible, no matter how broken things may seem. What about you? Are there relationships in your life that need mending? Is there someone waiting for your forgiveness, or someone you're hoping to reconnect with? Let this story inspire you to take that first step, no matter how difficult it may feel. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of love and family. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, for more inspiring stories like this, stories that touch the heart, spark hope, and remind us of what truly matters. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together, one story at a time.